A Japanese destroyer just fired a Tomahawk cruise missile for the first time in its history. Not a simulation, not a slide in some briefing room. A live missile launched from a Japanese warship during a joint exercise with the U.S. Navy. Defense reporters say this is the first time any Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force vessel has fired the American-made long-range weapon, and it happens as Tokyo races to build a strike capability it didn't have for most of the post-war era. This is a military that spent 8 decades under a strict, self-imposed rule limiting it to defense only. One missile leaving one launcher isn't a routine test. So here's the question this video is going to answer. Why now? And what does this single launch actually change? We'll go through what's confirmed about this drill and what isn't, why Japan spent years and billions of dollars chasing this specific missile, what kind of ship most likely fired it, and why a country whose constitution renounces war as a sovereign right is now holding a weapon built to strike targets hundreds of kilometers inland. We'll also flag where the public reporting runs out. On a story like this, what isn't confirmed yet matters almost as much as what is. Here's what's actually known. A Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force destroyer fired a Tomahawk cruise missile during a joint live-fire drill with the U.S. Navy, according to defense reporting. Outlets describe the exercise as a milestone in Japan's broader push to field long-range strike weapons, part of a rearmament program Tokyo has pursued openly since the early 2020s. The context, per that reporting, is rising tension with China and North Korea. Not one incident, but a shifting regional security picture that has pushed Japan to reconsider capabilities it avoided for generations. What isn't independently confirmed yet, the exact identity of the ship that fired the missile and the precise number of missiles launched. A few outlets note this directly. The broad fact of the launch is solid, sourced to defense reporting, while specifics like the hull number remain unconfirmed pending an official statement from the U.S. Navy or Japan's Ministry of Defense naming the vessel. We'll treat that distinction carefully throughout this video, because stories like this are exactly where rumor fills in blanks that official channels haven't closed yet. To understand why this launch matters, you have to go back to a policy most people outside Japan have never heard of, the doctrine of exclusively defense-oriented policy. For decades after World War II, under Article 9 of its constitution, Japan renounced war as a sovereign right and limited its self-defense forces by long-standing government interpretation to weapons and postures that couldn't strike first or reach deep into an adversary's territory. Offensive, long-range strike missiles were considered politically untouchable for most of that period. Not controversial. Effectively off the table. That's the obstacle Japan had to clear before a Tomahawk could ever leave a Japanese launcher, and it didn't happen overnight. The shift came in December 2022 when Japan's government formally revised its national security strategy, the country's core defense policy document, to introduce what it called counter-strike capability, the ability to hit an enemy's launch sites and military infrastructure instead of only intercepting incoming attacks. That policy change, debated for years inside Japanese politics before it was adopted, is the reason a Tomahawk purchase became possible at all. Without it, there'd be no missile to fire in this drill. The obstacle wasn't technical. It was constitutional and political, decades in the making, and Tokyo only cleared it by rewriting its own definition of self-defense. Once that door opened, Japan moved fast. In January 2024, Japan and the United States signed an agreement for Tokyo to buy up to 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles in a foreign military sale reported at around $2.35 billion. That made Japan only the second country in the world, after the United Kingdom, to operate the Tomahawk, a weapon the U.S. Navy has fired in combat for more than 3 decades, from the Gulf War through operations in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. Reporting on the acquisition says Japan also pushed to accelerate delivery, moving the timeline up by roughly a year, aiming to have the missiles operational sooner than originally planned. I went back through Japan's own defense budget documents and procurement announcements while researching this, and one thing kept standing out: how compressed the whole timeline was. A policy taboo that held for the better part of 80 years got reversed, funded, contracted, and apparently fired from a Japanese warship in under 4 years. That's an extraordinarily fast turnaround for any country's defense establishment, let alone one built on a doctrine of restraint. But buying a missile on paper and actually firing one from a warship are 2 different problems. The Tomahawk was designed and built for U.S. Navy combat systems, Integrating it into a Japanese destroyer means the missile's launch software, targeting data, and fire control sequencing all have to work with the ship's own Aegis combat system, a complex, safety-critical process that takes real engineering time, not just a signed contract. Japanese crews also had to be trained from essentially zero to operate a weapon class the Maritime Self-Defense Force had never fielded before. That's likely one reason this drill ran jointly with the U.S. Navy. A live-fire exercise alongside the missile's original operator is the standard way a new user checks that the integration actually works under real conditions before calling the capability operational. The leading candidates for Japan's Tomahawk integration are its Aegis-equipped destroyers fitted with vertical launching systems compatible with the missile, vessels already built around the same class of combat radar and missile defense architecture the U.S. Navy uses. Beyond that general description, the specific vessel involved in this drill hasn't been officially confirmed in available reporting, and we're not going to guess a name here. That's a detail worth watching for in an official Ministry of Defense or U.S. Pacific Fleet statement, not something to fill in ourselves. So the political obstacle got cleared. The technical integration was apparently checked out. The missile was fired. That closes one arc of this story, but it opens a bigger one. The real significance here isn't about one missile hitting one target in a drill. It's about what a Tomahawk-armed Japan means for the strategic map of East Asia going forward, and that's where the story gets genuinely contested. Here's some general context on the weapon itself, separate from anything specific to this drill. The Tomahawk is a subsonic, long-range cruise missile, originally developed by the United States in the 1970s and fielded from both ships and submarines. Depending on the variant, its range generally falls in the 1,000-mile class, letting a launch platform far offshore strike targets deep inland. That's exactly the kind of reach that falls outside a purely defensive posture and inside what Japan now calls counter-strike capability. It's a weapon built for standoff strike, hit something far away without putting the launching ship anywhere near the target. That's the capability Japan spent years working to acquire, and that's the capability this drill was apparently built to test. What surprises me most about this story isn't the missile itself. It's how fast Japan's strategic identity has shifted. For most of the post-war era, Japan fires an offensive long-range missile would have been close to unthinkable as a sentence. Now it's a reported news event, treated by defense outlets as a milestone rather than a rupture. That tells you something about how much the regional security environment has changed in a short window, and how much political consensus inside Japan has shifted to accommodate it. Zoom out, and Japan's move isn't happening in isolation. China has rapidly expanded its own long-range strike and naval capabilities over the past decade, and North Korea keeps testing ballistic and cruise missiles on a regular basis. Against that backdrop, Tokyo's own reasoning, laid out in its national security strategy, is that deterrence requires the ability to hold an adversary's launch sites at risk instead of only intercepting missiles once they're already in the air. Whether you find that persuasive or alarming often depends less on the facts of this one drill and more on how you view the broader regional arms dynamic. That's exactly where the debate around this story gets heated. This is the part people genuinely disagree about. Here's the take that'll probably draw some pushback. A lot of coverage frames this purely as Japan strengthening deterrence, as if that settles it. I think that's too tidy. Every new strike capability added to the region also lowers the threshold for what counts as an escalatory move by the other side. Beijing and Pyongyang aren't going to read a Japanese Tomahawk as a purely defensive gesture, whatever the doctrine calls it. Deterrence and arms race acceleration aren't mutually exclusive. Historically, they've often been the same policy viewed from two different capitals. Calling this drill just deterrence without acknowledging that risk isn't neutral reporting. It's picking a side without saying so. So here's a real question, and I'd genuinely like to know where you land on it. Does a Tomahawk-armed Japan make the region more stable because a capable ally deters Chinese and North Korean aggression before it starts? Or does it make the region more combustible because it pushes rival militaries to match the capability and narrows everyone's margin for miscalculation? There isn't an obviously correct answer, and reasonable analysts land on both sides of it. The drill itself, as far as confirmed reporting goes, appears to have gone as intended. A missile fired, a milestone reached, a capability demonstrated. But the test worked is rarely the end of a story like this. What comes next is the harder question. How fast Japan moves from, we successfully test-fired one missile, to, we have an operational, fleet-wide counterstrike capability. That transition is where the real strategic weight of this story actually lands. Let's be precise about where this stands, separating confirmed fact from what's still open. Confirmed, per defense reporting, a Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force destroyer fired a Tomahawk cruise missile for the first time in a joint live-fire drill with the U.S. Navy as part of Japan's broader push to field long-range strike weapons amid tension with China and North Korea. Also well established as public record, Japan's 2022 National Security Strategy revision introduced counterstrike capability as formal policy, and Japan signed a foreign military sale agreement in January 2024 to acquire up to 400 Tomahawks in a deal reported at roughly $2.35 billion with an accelerated delivery timeline. Not yet confirmed in available public reporting. The specific destroyer that fired the missile, the exact missile variant and count launched during this drill, and the precise date and location of the exercise beyond what's been generally reported. Those are the details to watch for in a follow-up statement from the U.S. Navy or Japan's Ministry of Defense. I'd treat any claim naming a specific ship right now with real caution until it's officially confirmed. One thing that stuck with me while putting this together: this drill, whatever its exact particulars turn out to be, is being treated by defense press as a genuine inflection point. Not routine training footage, but a first that outlets are covering specifically because it didn't happen for 80 years and now it has. That's usually a reliable signal that something structurally important shifted, even before all the granular details get locked down. There's more to this story we couldn't fully verify for this video, specifically what training and certification pipeline Japan is running to bring Tomahawk-capable crews to full operational readiness, fleet-wide, and on what timeline. If you want to follow up once official details on that come out, drop a comment and let us know. What's genuinely still open, beyond the drill's own specifics, is how the region responds. Will China or North Korea treat this as a routine alliance exercise, or as something that changes their own calculations? Will Japan's other Aegis destroyers get certified for Tomahawk operations on the accelerated schedule Tokyo has been pushing for, or will integration problems slow that down? And will this shift the broader debate inside Japan about how far exclusively defense-oriented policy can stretch before it stops meaning anything? None of those questions have public answers yet. They're worth tracking through primary sources rather than secondhand claims, and they're exactly the kind of follow-up we'll be watching for as more official detail becomes public. For now, what's confirmed is enough on its own. A Japanese warship has fired a Tomahawk for the first time in its history, in a joint drill with the U.S. Navy, at a moment when Tokyo is moving faster than at any point in its post-war history to field weapons it once considered off-limits. Whatever comes next, that already happened.